know you needed to break things off with Ellen?
I think it was a slow roll when you come to understand the truth of another. I wanted desperately to have that relationship be the love of my life. That was my Cinderella story.
Once you moved to New York, were you basically been gainfully employed ever since? You've probably taken
it's kind of amazing, other than my blacklisting for taking Ellen DeGeneres to the Volcano premiere years ago, and I didn't do a studio picture for 10 years. People don't know that part of my story or what happened to me because of that experience. But I feel very blessed that I've been able to. Listen, when you want to steal somebody else's language, the problem is you hit a wall because the language is enough to drive you forth. Its purposing was enough to give her power. And the reality is, if you are not on a conscious conversation and communication with the universe and its truth, you hit a wall because you can only get furthered if your intelligence and your heart meet. And unfortunately, that she did not greet.
Anne Heche spent years describing a side of Ellen DeGeneres that looked very different from the woman millions of people watched on television. At the time, Ellen was becoming one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces. Eventually, kindness itself would become part of her brand. She danced with her audience, surprised families with life-changing gifts, and ended her show by reminding viewers to be kind to one another. But Anne knew Ellen long before that image became a television empire. She wasn't a former employee watching from across a studio. She had been Ellen's partner. She had shared a life with her. And years after their relationship ended, Anne began talking openly about what she says happened behind closed doors. Some of those interviews sound very different today, because years later, former employees of the Ellen DeGeneres show would begin describing their own experiences behind the scenes. Their allegations were about a workplace, not Ellen's private relationship with Anne, and they shouldn't be treated as proof of Anne's claims. But together, they raised an uncomfortable question. How different was the Ellen America watched on television from the Ellen people around her believed they knew? And Anne Heche had been talking about that question long before the scandal exploded.
Ellen bashing, I am here to speak the truth about a time that happened that's important to know.
Okay. Did you ever try to reach out and make peace with Ellen?
Every day of my life with her was reaching out to her to make peace. I think it was a very difficult thing for her to trust that I was a woman who could fall in love with a woman without being gay. And I think that was a lot to process. So I tried to make that process as simple as possible by quitting Hollywood, moving to Ojai, growing gardens, starting to write and direct, which I did with her and Sharon Stone, a movie of all things called Misconception. And nothing would satisfy her soul.
Anne and Ellen DeGeneres went public with their relationship in 1997. It's difficult to understand today just how risky that decision was. Anne was becoming a major Hollywood actress. She appeared in films alongside Johnny Depp, Harrison Ford, Robert De Niro, and Dustin Hoffman. Ellen, meanwhile, had just publicly come out at a time when openly gay stars could still face enormous professional consequences. Instead of hiding their relationship, Anne and Ellen walked directly into the spotlight together. And according to Anne, Hollywood made her pay for it. One incident stayed with her for decades. Anne was starring in Volcano when she decided to bring Ellen to the film's premiere. Anne later said she had been explicitly warned that doing so could have consequences. She went anyway. Years later, she described what happened that night and what she believed happened to her career afterward.
Be working for
I remember Volcano.
I do remember Volcano.
I like that movie.
Thank you. I did too, except I couldn't see the end of it because they ushered Ellen and me out of the premiere before it ended, put us in a car and said, well, we don't want you back here. We will not be accepting pictures of you and Ellen. And then I was fired. I was told before I went to the premiere with Ellen that I would be fired. And I was...
Are we talking about 90?
Now you're going to put years on...
What makes that interview important isn't simply that Anne believed Hollywood punished her. It's that she was willing to accept those consequences to stand beside Ellen publicly.
Yes.
Early, there was 2 volcanoes. Dante's Peak,
yeah, but they came out the same week.
Right.
Ours won, by the way, and then they blamed me for its failure for taking a woman. I was like, but we were #1 in the box office. The confusion of how I was fired and the fact that nobody has ever acknowledged it is just shows, in a way, it shows how much further we've come. Because if that would have happened today, obviously, it wouldn't happen today, and I feel glad that I'm a part of that.
But according to Anne, the relationship she was protecting became increasingly difficult in private. And this is where her story changes. Years after the breakup, Anne began speaking much more openly about what she says the relationship was actually like. She described gradually giving things up in an attempt to make the relationship work. Acting wasn't the only issue. Anne said she became increasingly separated from parts of her own life. Eventually, she says she realized she was losing something much more basic: her ability to maintain her own friendships and identity. Listen carefully to how Anne described that period.
What happened was that I was, through the circumstances, shut out from things that I cared about. And in order to make her feel that she was being loved, I would erase those things from my path, such as acting, and replace them with things that I thought would give her a foundation. As we got further and further away from me being able to be in public the way that would please, I began getting further and further away from my friends and my friendships. And one of the things that concerned me very much was that I was beginning to feel shut off and shut down and shut away.
That alone is striking. But Anne went further. She described one specific conversation with Ellen as the moment she finally understood that the relationship could not continue. According to Anne, she told Ellen that she needed friends in her life. And Ellen's response, Anne claimed, made the decision for her.
And if this answers the question, when I told Ellen that I needed to have friends, she said she did not want to have a girlfriend that needed that. And that is the day I left.
That was Anne's account of their relationship. Ellen's perspective on their breakup was not identical, and allegations about the dynamics of a private relationship are difficult for outsiders to independently establish. But Anne continued telling her version long after the relationship was over, and Ellen's career was about to move in a very different direction. In 2003, the Ellen DeGeneres show premiered. It became enormous. Over the following years, Ellen transformed from a comedian and actress into one of the most powerful personalities on daytime television. Celebrities wanted to sit across from her. Audience members dreamed of being surprised by her. Viral clips of Ellen dancing, joking with guests, and changing people's lives spread across the internet. And one message sat at the center of it all: be kind to one another. Kindness wasn't simply something Ellen talked about. It became inseparable from her public identity. That's what makes what happened years later so damaging. Because eventually, people who had actually worked inside Ellen's television empire began describing an environment they said looked nothing like the one viewers saw on screen.
Expect a lot when you go to meet like your idol, and then when you get disappointed, it's like such a letdown.
Said a head writer came up to her at a party and said, "Oh, I only know the names of the white people who work here." Spoken to nearly 50 former employees who worked on the Ellen show. All of them say they found what their experience was behind the scenes to be in contrast to what the show makes a profit off of and what Ellen DeGeneres has built an entire brand off of, which is the Be Kind message.
In 2020, BuzzFeed News published allegations from current and former employees of the Ellen DeGeneres show. The initial reports described complaints about workplace culture, including allegations involving intimidation, racial insensitivity, and fear of retaliation.
The DeGeneres show is facing new allegations this morning of rampant misconduct and harassment in the workplace. The new accusations reported by BuzzFeed News come just 2 weeks after another article on the site detailing a racist and toxic work environment. DeGeneres responded Thursday before the new article was published, apologizing and taking responsibility for what happens at the show. Warner Media is also conducting its own internal investigation.
Further reporting brought more serious allegations against senior members of the production staff. And suddenly, the conversation wasn't being driven by internet rumors. People who had actually worked on the show were talking. One former employee described an especially revealing dynamic behind the scenes. She claimed that one senior figure could behave aggressively towards staff, while Ellen remained removed from the confrontation. Her description of Ellen's reaction is worth hearing directly.
She would laugh because I was hoping she was going to say, "Ed, you can't be yelling at the crew this way. You can't be yelling at people this way." She laughed and she said, Every production needs their dog.
Meaning
Ed is her dog.
Like her attack dog.
Her attack dog. So therefore she doesn't need to do that. He took the role of being the attack dog that she didn't have to now be the attack dog. So she didn't have to yell.
Then came the obvious question. If behavior like this was happening around Ellen, could she really have been completely unaware of the environment? The former employee didn't hesitate.
You don't think that rings true?
It's a lie.
Muscat won 2 daytime Emmys with the show. She was let go in 2004.
As a host, she's amazing. As a host. But as a boss and someone who's behind the scenes running the show, she's a different person. She's not the person people see.
That is one former employee's allegation, not an independently established account of Ellen's personal knowledge. But she wasn't the only person describing a dramatic difference between Ellen on camera and Ellen behind the scenes. And that distinction went directly to the heart of Ellen's brand. Ellen responded to the growing controversy in a letter to her staff. She said she had wanted the show to be a place of happiness where everyone would be treated with respect, and expressed disappointment that this had apparently not always happened. Several senior producers eventually left the show following the investigation. When Ellen returned to television, she addressed the controversy publicly. But one question remained. How much did Ellen herself actually know? Some former employees believed she knew more than she admitted. Others focused their accusations primarily on senior producers and the wider workplace culture. There was never a finding establishing every allegation being made about Ellen personally. But by then, something bigger had happened. The public image had cracked, and people began looking backward. Old interviews resurfaced, previous encounters were reconsidered. Stories that once seemed disconnected were suddenly being viewed through a completely different lens. And inevitably, people went back to Anne. Anne was still alive when the workplace controversy erupted. And when she was asked about it, she didn't claim to know what had happened inside the Ellen DeGeneres show. She hadn't worked there, and she hadn't been close to Ellen for years. Instead, she made an important distinction. Listen to how she responded when asked directly about the controversy.
Rumors Ellen was far from nice were out there for years. What was your reaction to the toxic workplace controversy?
I felt that it was in the hands of the people who needed to speak their truth. I hadn't spoken to Ellen in years, and I feel that the stories that need to be listened to are being told.
That's important because Anne wasn't claiming insider knowledge of the television show. She was speaking from her own experience with Ellen. Then, the interviewer pushed further. Did the allegations about Ellen's behavior ring true based on the woman Anne had known? Anne's response was measured, but revealing.
Emotion is a container for our actions that we've not healed. And unfortunately, the environment was something that I understood.
Now the two stories were sitting beside each other. Former employees were describing their experiences in Ellen's professional world. Anne had been describing her experience in Ellen's private world. Those stories do not prove each other, but they did cause people to reconsider something that had once seemed almost untouchable: Ellen's carefully constructed public persona. And Anne eventually addressed that subject more directly than almost anyone else. Why did she leave Ellen? Her answer wasn't about fame. It wasn't about Hollywood pressure. And it wasn't about the enormous public attention surrounding their relationship. Instead, Anne brought the conversation back to something that would later become almost synonymous with Ellen DeGeneres: kindness. This is probably the most revealing part of Anne's account, so it's better to hear it from her.
If we live in loving kindness, and that is my destination and my dream for us all, I would say that was not her goal.
So basically what you're saying is you can only keep up the gig for so long.
I didn't know what, as I always call God, of your grandpa, Kiki. I don't know Kiki's timing, but you face what you face in the mirror every single day. And unfortunately, it's just like I say in my first book, you don't get 2 cups of insanity in and get to take 1 cup out. You meet your maker.
Well, that was a riddle, I gotta say.
Well, God is a real. You're gonna have to start getting used to me now.
That interview becomes particularly striking when you remember what happened next. Because Ellen would go on to build one of the biggest television brands in America around exactly that word: kindness. Years before former employees publicly challenged that image, Anne Heche was already describing a disconnect between the principal and the person she says she knew. That doesn't mean Anne predicted the workplace scandal. It doesn't mean her relationship allegations prove what happened years later on a television production. But it does mean that criticism of Ellen's public and private personas did not suddenly begin in 2020. Somebody who had once been extraordinarily close to her had been talking about that difference for years. Anne and Ellen largely went their separate ways after their breakup. Anne continued acting and speaking publicly about different periods of her life, including the enormous professional and personal consequences that came with their relationship. Then, in August 2022, tragedy struck. Anne crashed her car into a Los Angeles home. The resulting fire left her critically injured, and she never regained consciousness. She died at the age of 53. Her death was officially ruled accidental. The Los Angeles County Medical Examiner listed inhalation injury and thermal injuries among the causes of death. There is no credible evidence connecting Ellen DeGeneres to Anne Heche's death. And there doesn't need to be for Anne's story to matter. Because the important part isn't speculation about how Anne died. It's what she said while she was alive. Anne had experienced Ellen before the daytime empire, before the dancing, before the giveaways, before millions of viewers heard the same message at the end of every episode: be kind to one another. She described feeling isolated. She described sacrificing parts of her own life. She described the moment she decided she needed to leave. And years later, when people from Ellen's professional world began telling very different stories about life behind the cameras, Anne didn't celebrate Ellen's downfall. She told people to listen to those who were finally speaking. Maybe that's the most interesting part of her story. Anne Heche didn't need the 2020 scandal to tell her what she believed about Ellen DeGeneres. She had already lived her version of it. The scandal simply caused millions of other people to go back and listen. So the question isn't whether Anne somehow predicted what would happen years later. It's much simpler than that. Did Anne Heche see a side of Ellen DeGeneres long before the rest of the public did? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you enjoy deep dives into the stories behind Hollywood's carefully constructed public images, subscribe for more.